All right, hello. My name is Joe, and I'm going to be reviewing, commentating on this um, very interesting and dynamic conversation between Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins, mediated by Alex O'Connor. I think that it's not. I don't know that it's a debate. It does say they debate this whole concept of cultural Christianity, but it's more of like trying to understand what that means, and um, Jordan Peterson really latching on to the idea that like he got Richard Dawkins because he talks about Christianity in a way that's like it is as if he's uh, a proponent of Christianity because he grew up in it. But anyway, let's listen and see what this conversation has.
Made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. And the first question was,
you are changing the subject.
I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to
We
get
can
back to
do
it.
cultural Christianity, but I think I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you.
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the
quantum, yeah,
stories.
yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to
Okay,
zero in
fine.
on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out. But what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not.
My first impressions here, and I've watched this a couple times before, but I love that he's closing his eyes there. My first impressions are like this is a longer conversation, but this dynamic is throughout, wherein Jordan Peterson is like very from a dialectical standpoint, he's very aggressive and extremely defensive, and he is he takes the reins of the conversation and just grips them really tight. He is less interested in listening, being calm, and he seems to be like if this was a debate where like a boxing match where the number of punches is counted, but instead we could just count the number of words. Jordan Peterson is like so verbose, so pontificating, and trying to justify everything as if he's being attacked. That's just an interesting dynamic that I think Jordan Peterson is, whenever he's in conversation with someone who doesn't agree with him, he's very vociferous or very, and it's hard not to get into that mode when you're listening to him, that you're like, yes, let's fucking learn and talk and get into this, because he's very animated and very dynamic. But I actually think that's all just a kind of subconscious tactic and a personality trait. I don't think it helps his argumentation. And while on the surface it seems confident, it actually belies a lack of confidence because he can't be more calm and clear, which is how Richard Dawkins is in this entire thing. Is very, very steady, very clear, obviously focused and paying attention and listening. And when he answers questions, he tends to do it in a more concise way. I think Richard Dawkins is a more concrete, concise thinker than Jordan Peterson, who is a very abstract, story, narrative-oriented thinker. So that's my impression of the dynamic here, and it kind of is throughout the entire longer conversation. But let's continue here.
So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement. So,
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes.
He brings up chimpanzee cousins, I think, because he's trying to bring Dawkins' field of study into the conversation, but it's not really useful. And his talk of barbarism and a progress toward more ethical treatment of people isn't a evidence that Christianity itself is the force for that good, because Christianity is subject to all of that same barbarism. Roughly speaking, as you go into the Old Testament, there's tons and tons of barbarism and things like that. So I think Jordan Peterson mainly focuses on New Testament things, ethics based on equality and treatment, fair treatment, and less government and things like that that Jesus talks about, which is fine. You can use different parts of the Bible to pick out for your ethical frameworks, but to put it all under umbrella of Christianity is the force for good is to whitewash the good things and negate the bad things, which is what Christian apologists always do. And that's another thing that I wanted to point out in this, is that Jordan Peterson isn't taking the role of a philosopher in this, or a scientist, or even as we like to think of him as a rational thinker, but he does so many things that make that hard to believe. But he does a lot of things that makes that clear, that he does have rationale in his thinking, that he's just always on these kind of he doesn't have a concrete answer to a lot of these moral and philosophical questions, because he's constantly trying to reconcile the rationale with the religious. And because he's a Christian apologist, and maybe he wouldn't say that because if you put yourself into the camp of Christian apologist, then you're automatically outside of the camp of the scientific and rational, because that's the traditional dichotomy between those two things, and because there's a incoherence and a lack of consistency. If you believe in science and Christianity, you're always going to have these conflicts. Jordan Peterson is just does anything he can to try to stay within both realms, and in his conversations, it becomes clear that that doesn't work because it doesn't allow you to have clear perspectives on scientific concepts and rational concepts while still believing in these mythological concepts. It's trying to reconcile two conflicting concepts. And so he's also taking the long way around to try to answer something that Richard Dawkins was asking. So let's see if they can actually get to these questions here.
Yes, they are.
Right. So
Yes.
so we move forward into the light with great difficulty.
Yes,
And
yes.
the fact that we can take that for granted now and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's...
He's acting like moral progress can be distilled into or can be attributed to this Christian ethic. But as I would see it, I think that moral progress kind of is always a progress of questioning and conflict and skepticism and pushing back against whatever the norms are. And so it's more in spite of Christianity that we have moral progress because of Christianity's dogmatic rules. And while a Christian can continually adapt their interpretation of God's will because it's so vague, that you can have Christians who are also moral in the modern world, but that adaptation is not a pure adherence to Christian values. It is the kind of secular humanist moral conception that has brought about more of these positive changes that we see, as well as the conflict between society and its governing justice system, like our ability to change laws and to challenge norms. That's the good thing that we get out of democratic societies and out of secular societies, because traditionally in Christianity and other states, the religion was the enforced system. The enforced justice system was based on the religion, and in America and other countries, we've gone away from that religious stranglehold on justice and on codified moral frameworks, and that's good. That's good. It's good that we aren't stuck in barbaric biblical times, and that we can do things that are better for more people from a generally subjective standpoint.
That's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective.
This is a straightforward question that Christians or people who believe in miracles should be able to answer. And if you believe that Jesus was a real historical person and a human, then you should have you should have looked into and come up with a answer to the question of whether he was born of a virgin. And if you believe in God, easy, yes, he was born of a virgin. God made it happen, and God can do that. And why not? You already believe in magic. Why can't this happen? But if you are trying to live in two different worlds, like Jordan Peterson, you're trying to live in this scientific as well as this very mythological world, then you don't have a clear answer to this question because it doesn't make sense, because they don't work together. Now, if you think of Jesus as just a mechanism for mythology and for allowing for a story, and he's just a fictional character, then you can also say, yes, he was born of a virgin birth, but that's easy. But if you think that he's supposed to be a non-fictional representation of reality, then and you say, no, he wasn't born of a virgin birth, that's just an added mythological narrative, tacked on to a real person, then you are questioning the entire enterprise of Christianity, which relies heavily on these proofs of God's miraculous power in the world. And without those proofs of God's power, then it dwindles down more to subjective interpretation of events and feelings and descriptions. But if God really did create miracles like walking on water, water to wine, and virgin births and things like that, if those really did happen, then you're set. You have your proof. So Jordan Peterson just won't be able to answer these questions very easily because he doesn't want to take a stand against science and for religion, even though his entire premise and perspective is from the justification of Christian mythology as being the most valuable storytelling, moral narrative that we have. But I don't get why you can't just say something like, the narrative and the values that work are really good, and let's get rid of the rest, and let's get rid of the magical thinking. Let's just be ethical, and why not cherry pick openly, I guess. Anyway, continue here.
And from a mythic perspective, what the story of the virgin birth means. And I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that...
What the fuck are you talking about? Any culture that doesn't hold the women and the babies as sacred dies. From an evolutionary perspective, if we were simply murdering women and murdering children, we wouldn't exist. No one would exist. Genetic propagation wouldn't exist. That's silly. It's silly to be like, there are cultures that just kill and don't, and they enslave women, and then they any biological system that doesn't, at least in some way, foster propagation simply wouldn't continue. And so we are the product of that, regardless of your stories. Your stories don't dictate. People don't refrain from murdering children like all of the children and their own children because of stories. This is a fundamental biological thing. Anyway,
It needs to be expressed in a
Is it
form.
true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well, let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than?
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like,
this is another problem that Jordan Peterson has, trying to base something like an objective perspective on art. Art is subjective. That is one of the characteristics of art, in my opinion. Art is not a art is not an expression of any type of objective truth, and it isn't meant to be. And lessons that you can learn from artistic expressions are can be very valuable, but they in and of themselves are not objective truths. They are personal expressions of emotion and of concepts and of potentially events and interactions and how things are. But the idea that one book is more important than another book, or more value than another book, or better than another book, is like saying one painting is better than another painting, or one video game is better than another video game. These are subjective preferences. You just like those things better, and you find value in the emergent elements of those art pieces. But that's why it's important to differentiate certain emotionally driven subjective preferences and things like science and facts, and why those differences are what can lead to more consistent outcomes, more predictable outcomes, is because they're not solely embedded in these subjective artistic expressions. So like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like, so if the Bible is a fictional work of art, then it is on the same playing field as all other works of art, like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. And I would say the morality in things like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings are probably more clear and better defined and easier to understand. And they're just endless pieces of art that that express moral preferences. So your adherence to this one particular set of mythologies and parables is dogmatic, and you know, he likes these other books like Dostoevsky and these are great books. These are great things to get perspectives and to learn about how people are. But they are certainly abstract, and they are very subjectively derived.
Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
There's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea? Let's take you talked about clitoridectomy. Let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like, I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation, given its radical age, that both men and women carry the carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
It's not a fact that if I can oppress you, why shouldn't I? That's a question. And morality, because it has to do with how people treat each other, is a very complex set of considerations. It's not the same as a fact. And he's trying to ridicule the idea that science can come up with facts that then inform morality. And there is a huge divide between pure facts and the way people should treat each other. But in science, you can still understand certain aspects of suffering, and especially in psychology, you can understand the aspects of things like depression and abuse and the negative outcomes that those have on the individuals and society in general. And those are types of facts that do help inform the way that we treat each other. And they can go hand in hand in a philosophical framework where somebody wants to be wise, not dogmatic, and they allow you to go against pre-existing moral thinking by understanding new facts about the way that people are, and by admitting that morality involves emotion. We can also understand the facts of emotion and the facts of empathy and things like that. He's trying to say that Christianity is the best route toward moral progress, but he talks about women. But there are plenty of examples in the Bible of how women are not treated as equals, and how women are not in the place that they are now with the moral progress that we have. So the idea that you could just read the Bible and get to today's morality is not true, because they've been reading the Bible for thousands of years, and we are only now at a point where women can vote and own and not wear hats, and not only there are things about slavery and how men should be above women and stuff like that. That's all in the Bible, and it's it's in the challenging of those previously viewed notions that we've made progress, not in just saying, well, there's a thing in the Bible about men and women both being like God. So what? There's still big divides between the treatment of people in the Bible. And the Bible talks about slavery and how to treat slaves and all that stuff. It isn't a modern conception of moral goodness.
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question. But is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise.
So what? The Christian power system got embedded with the government's power system, And so that's what I don't know that it brought that's the sole attribution of Rome's demise. Also, paganism is not demolished, I don't think at all. I actually think paganism was simply or simply adapted to these larger societal pressures and sort of was just enveloped, like was sort of morphed into these other religions. Lots of pagan things are still seen today, and Christianity is filled with pagan concepts, like sacrifices and things. Like, what are you talking about? Demolish paganism. So what? Just because one religion dominates another religion or one society dominates another society, that doesn't make it right. It just makes it powerful. So if he's talking about how might doesn't make right, then Christianity is not. You can't use that as an argument to say that Christianity is right. It's not good.
So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions. What would you say? They don't strike me as they're not getting to the point.
I know
The
that. I
story
know you
has a
think
purpose.
that. Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid, but it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned. And it's
If it's more than valid and there are perfect reasons to debate it, then why is it beside the issue? What the fuck are you talking about? You're saying that you don't want to talk about it, but that's not what they're here to do, because Richard Dawkins is interested in facts and science and biology and evolution. And in order for someone to be taken seriously as a person who can rationally think of science and biology from a realistic perspective, and then we can maybe believe these other things that they say, they have to have an answer to the question of whether or not virgin births are possible. And that's why it's a sticky question, and he just won't answer it. He does eventually answer with, I don't know, which is not, it's an answer, it's fine, you can move past it. But it's like, why don't you know? Like, why? What is getting in the way of your ability to believe in these pretty evident and very logical and somewhat and completely controversial scientific facts? Why, if you're a scientist, if you're a social scientist who's studied all these papers and done all this research, and you use that system of epistemology or a way of knowing things, why can't you just answer the question?
It's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 16 years.
That last statement is, I don't know what he means, and is silly. We didn't discover that people can understand the world through stories 60 years ago. Stories are the main way in which we describe things, and it's probably the main way in which we teach moral principles. And but the idea that this abstract description of reality is reality, or is more important than reality, or because it imbues or it describes values, that it matters more than reality. I'm happy to create a dichotomy between these kind of very base scientific facts and a interpretation of how we should act in the world and our value systems. Also, value systems are not solely derived from stories. They are also come from the bottom up, from biology and from nature, in that we want to survive, and that's like we want to survive and procreate, and those are the main drivers of value. The reason that food has value is because we can live off of it. The reason that water has value is because we can live off it. The reason that other people have value is partly because of our cooperation with them and our ability to procreate with them. Those are all well below story level narratives. Those are true whether we talk about stories or not. They're true in the animal world and they're true in the human world, because we're animals. And so it's this adherence to the primacy and superiority of narrative that he has a hard time accepting these kind of rudimentary facts. Like, fine, just live in fantasy world, live in narrative, live in subjective preference land, but don't pretend like you're being scientific. That's not going to work.
60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well,
It's
Jesus
a different
had
kind
an
of
earthly
question.
father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin then? So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question.
It's funny how people can simultaneously treat Jordan Peterson as a scientific intellectual and then allow him to act in and just dismiss science, like Alex O'Connor's doing here. Is like, if, let's say, science is a bad approach, well, if science is a bad approach, then you need to push away all the benefits and uses and structures of science. Like, you can't say science is like the best way to learn things and know truths and then just dismiss them in this one category of importance, which is inconsistent to do.
Did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
He even says it's a deep mythological enterprise. Also, they're not trying to undermine the entire thing with this one fact. They're just trying to get to this one fact, and then maybe from there establish additional facts. And if you're talking about an overarching framework, then the individual elements and their validity and consistency and their logic matters. And so, because he's on the defensive as a Christian apologist, he's like, I can't believe you're using this one thing to undermine this entire thing I've been talking about, which is how useful and valuable Christianity is on a societal scale. And it's like, but we can accept certain, um, uh, uh, we can, you can say that there are useful, valuable, um, lessons to be learned from the Bible without saying all of everything is literal in the Bible and everything is exactly God's word, and if the miracles didn't happen, then it blows everything up. That's not necessary. You can just say, I like these things in the Bible, and I believe in these things that are scientific. But I think if you do start to take this kind of approach, then it leads you away from Christianity because it allows you to say, well, I'm just picking and choosing the lessons that I think are useful in today's context. And that allows you to take from other religions and from other things like Stoicism or Buddhism or from Hinduism or whatever, and that's scary to somebody who has put all their eggs into this particular basket. And I think that is non-philosophical. Wisdom doesn't come from being solely adherent to a particular belief system, especially one that's so fraught with inconsistencies as Christianity. Wisdom comes from taking in lots of perspectives and lots of data and lots of ways of living and ways of understanding, and uh, trying to integrate that information in a way that is uh, 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 consistent, logical, and leads toward good outcomes for yourself and others, and things that you might be able to uh, teach others in a way that makes things better from a subjective human expectation.
We
think
weren't
it's
doing that.
foolish.
Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. So even on the meme question, for example, like I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And
What I don't get is he's talking about how he has so much knowledge about religious histories and how they've battled, but Christianity hasn't won any kind of battle. And if you look at other cultures and countries and religions, they are varied. They are just super varied. And everyone in those cultures who believes in those things is about as confident and as um, uh, um, adherent to those particular beliefs as Jordan is, although he's probably on the high scale of adherence and of belief, even though he's supposed to be open-minded, which I don't see the case. I don't see that being the case. But if I just don't get what he means by like I've seen all this and Richard Dawkins doesn't. But Richard Dawkins knows. Has an understanding of biology and evolution that you couldn't, that you just will not understand. But if you're having a debate about what's real and something of what people should do, then all of these different perspectives should be incorporated um, into a more flexible system that allows for humility and allows you to be skeptical of your own beliefs. And Richard or Peterson is just not particularly. Maybe he's really struggled and wrestled with his own beliefs. He has a thing called wrestling with God, but you're really just wrestling with yourself, I guess. But he's it's almost insulting to say I know this better than he does. But when we're talking about virgin births, uh, you can both agree on something, and you saying I don't know, why don't you are really good at religion, why don't you know? I don't get it. It's not very he's not really planting a flag in that uh, ring.
And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. We cannot, there's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Moral systems are an added layer of social behavior. And prior to language and philosophical inquiry and religious inquiry, we were engaging in value-based behavior. And at some point, we decided to delineate the concept of a fact and the concept of a moral right and wrong. But but underlying that, and from a bottom-up perspective, morality is a way to describe how we treat each other, and then we put value statements on that as far as what are proper and sustainable moral rules. But no one's saying that we have to get rid of morality and take science as our version of morality. You're just saying that you think we should be Christians and conservative and be more traditional, and that's okay. You can say that, but just say that. Just say what we should do and why we should do it and what the outcomes will be, instead of saying that the only reason that you should believe me is because of this power that Christianity has. It's just not very persuasive to me.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different...
It's also weird that he would be like, we can't use facts to create a moral framework, and that's a fact. It's kind of like using the word fact as a like a mic drop, like, haha, I'm using your word of fact to dismantle your use of facts. It's not great.
Different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That
you can, if some of those facts are related to human survival and human psychology. There can be a fact of suffering, depression, abuse are true and unwanted. So what? That's fine. But what did he just say? I lost my train of thought as far as what he was just saying about hierarchy or prioritization of facts. I think that some facts are neutral. I think the fact that that door is white is essentially neutral, and I don't need to prioritize that fact. So the idea that all facts are put into priority and that's super important and we need a system for that, I think is not true. I think moral values and values as far as uh, um, gradations of better for people and worse for people are things that we prioritize, and that's an important thing to understand. And in the modern world, we're adapting to what we all the changes that we find in this hierarchy, which is fine.
That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of the space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, by the way. I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to 1 hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
I think it's a really good conversation. I really like that Richard Dawkins seems to be representing himself and his views, and he's just like, I like facts. And then Jordan Peterson seems to be representing all of humanity or all of the way that people should be, and I think that's part of the reason he's so adamant about it and so emotional about it, because he really thinks that it's very important as far as influencing society and making things better. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's very popular, is because I think he really, really wants to impart value and impart a value system on others, and that type of rhetoric and proselytizing is people really want to know what they should do, and they can be open to those ideas, and I don't think it's bad for anybody in particular to talk about the way things should be and the way things are and the way things have been. But I just think that he's not particularly scientific or open-minded, Jordan Peterson, and I think that concepts about how to rule and how to enforce morality are complicated, and I think systems of belief are important, and having beliefs that lead toward less freedom and more abuse are things that we should argue against. And if his argumentation brings about positive change, I'm okay with that. But it also seems rigid and dogmatic, and not super humanistic or modern, and it's not wholly consistent. So anyway, that's going to do it. I am done with this. It's a lively conversation, and I wanted to throw in my cents, my 2 or 3 cents on the topic. So thanks for checking it out.